Today we're going to go on a little trip through the listening stack from Goth all the way to Wonky beats with one surprising album in between. Now we've been jamming this record a lot lately, Flatland by Sisters of Mercy. Now I've had this record for a long time, but I've always kind of underrated this record. And the reason for that, I think, is because of the cover. I mean, you can tell that the cover looks kind of silly, right? So, you know, every time I would see this record on my shelf, I would flip past it because I was like, I really don't want to listen to this album because the cover looks so corny. But yeah. So recently I decided to give it a spin, and it has been living on my turntable for a couple of weeks at this point. And what I really like about this record, or actually what stands out immediately about this record, is the big 80s production. You know, the very big, dramatic 80s production. You know, there's a lot of reverb on this album. Big kind of drum machine sound. You know, what's funny about this album, like the cover looks super dramatic, right? But actually the songs on this album are, you know, most of them are pretty warm and inviting, actually. It's like, yeah, it's kind of a strange thing about this record, is that this album actually sounds a lot like, you know, when you would drink like a nice cup of glue wine on a cold winter's day. That's basically how this record sounds. So. And also the pacing on this album is it's pretty funny, actually, because on both sides of this album, both sides, they start out with like this big dramatic song, you know. Yeah, especially the first songs, Dominion and Mother Russia, you know, very anthemic. You know, a chorus that just sticks in your head when you listen to it. And then on side B, of course, opens with This Corrosion, which is kind of like a 50s rock and roll swagger, actually. That's the thing too about this album, is that a lot of it is actually, yeah, a lot of the songs have like this, this 50s rock and roll energy to it, which is pretty interesting. But and then both sides, as each side progresses, you know, they descend into this, from these really anthemic songs, they start to descend into this like Goth drama, you know, and then it collapses into just pure melancholy. So it's pretty interesting how this record is paced. Now, as I was listening to this album, and this randomly occurred to me, is that it actually is like an evil twin to this album right here, Soul Mining by The. Now, this connection might not seem obvious at first, because yeah, that's how it goes in my head sometimes. Like, I listen to an album, and then I hear something like the production or the way the album is paced, and I immediately think about another unrelated record, right? So this album, if you know this one, Soul Mining, this is obviously also very heavy on the drum machines. Now, when I listened to this album, I was like, I actually can't tell whether Flatland is the evil twin or this album is the evil twin, because, you know, this album looks very colorful as you can tell, but you see his face on the back, seems to be screaming out in agony. And a lot of the lyrics on this album deal with like anxiety, you know, alienation, isolation, just being a nervous wreck, basically. And yeah, it's what would you say? Excuse me. Yeah, this album is not as, or the lyrical content is not as colorful as this album cover would suggest, you know. And also the pacing on this album is pretty much the inverse of this album. So like I said, you know, both sides of this album start out, you know, really grand, really anthemic, and then they collapse into this very melancholic state of affairs. But this album basically does the opposite. So the album starts out in a way that you're not sure how the album will progress, basically. So it starts out kind of unsure of itself and doesn't really know what it wants to do. And then as each side unfolds, the album slows up and you can hear these pop sensibilities unfold, basically. So it's kind of weird how that works. So you know, what's also funny is that immediately made me think about this album right here, The Search Engine by DJ Footh. Now, what made me think, you know, going from Soul Mine into Search Engine is because Matt Johnson of The is featured on one of the songs on Giant, which is basically a re-recording from the song Giant on the album Soul Mining. Now, this album is a freaking mind melter. So this album is rooted in the UK dance scene, I guess, rave scene, breakbeat, turntablism. You know, it's kind of like, it's not really a hip hop album in that sense, but it takes a lot of stuff from other genres as well. So this, what would you say? Yeah, this album is basically a compilation album of the 3 preceding EPs. They are featured here in this booklet. So this album is really, the booklet is really well done. Tons of photos, tons of illustrations. And this album is basically a dark journey into, what would you say? Yeah, this also covers themes of alienation. You know, you have, of course, the very futuristic theme with the search engine, you know. How everything is online, basically. How everything is digital. Yeah, like I said, the alienation that comes with that. So, there are some other guests on this album as well. J.G. Thirlwell. You know, the guy behind the Fetus Project. You know, if you know Scraping Fetus Off the Wheel. You've got Fetus on Your Breath. That kind of stuff, you know. So industrial from the 80s, basically. So he's featured on this album. So this, like I said, this album is basically just a mind-melting hybrid of all different kinds of styles, you know. From synth pop to there's a song on here called "The Electric Hoax," which is my favorite song on the album, and it's what would you say? It's basically like 70s psychedelic rock inspired with like a really cool breakbeat, really cool drumming breakbeat behind it. Very, very cool stuff. If you're into darker kind of music and you're not really familiar with like turntablism, breakbeat, down tempo, that kind of stuff, I would suggest look into this album. because it's fucking awesome. So it's funny to me that this album came out in 2012, and it's really funny to me that it's really what would you say? You know, at the same time you had stuff like this going on. Jaunty by Twirling. So this came out in 2011. So same time frame, but totally different aesthetic. You know, also of course, very beat inspired. You know, very sample based. Takes influence from all kinds of music, like DJ Food, the search engine, but the end result is just totally different. Like this is way more inspired by like 60s psychedelic pop music. You can kind of tell by looking at the cover, right? You know, very colorful, very psychedelic looking. But this album is what would you say? It's not it's all over the place sonically, but it's very contained in a specific kind of aesthetic, you know. So it's not like it's not bouncing off the walls, you know. It's not very high energy, you know. It's kind of restrained, this album, which actually works in its advantage, I would say. But just a very weird album sonically. It's parts of it remind me of Animal Collective, especially in the vocals. So this is not all instrumental. This album. I mean, parts of it are, but the singing is actually my least favorite part of the album. But it's very playful. It's very whimsical. And actually too, that made me think of like, the whole Canterbury scene too, because if and this is also one of those weird connections that's happening in my head when I listen to an album like this. Also because I was listening to Caravan a lot lately, and I was thinking like, man, if Caravan had like access to like samples and DAWs and whatnot back in the day, they probably would have come up with an album that is not too dissimilar to this kind of stuff. So that's pretty much the listening stack, stuff that I was listening to a little while ago. So like I said, from Goth to Wonky beats and all the connections that happen inside my head when I listen to these albums. So if you haven't listened to these albums, it sounds kind of random basically, but if you have listened to these albums, let me know what you think. And thanks for watching, and see you guys in the next one. So cheers.